What's going on, Sideboard podcast fam? This is your host, Caleb Williamson, and our co-host, Timothy Clunt. What's going on, Tim?
Not much. How you doing, Caleb?
Doing pretty great, doing great. Yeah, so how are you doing, though?
Pretty good. Had kind of a long weekend laying a bunch of cement and stuff, so body's a little bit
That's
tired, but doing pretty good.
That does not sound fun at all.
Yeah, it was not. I mean, it was still a good time, like with the guys I was doing it with, but the labor itself kind of sucked.
Yeah, yep, that's kind of just how it is, manual labor and all that.
Oh yeah.
All right, so let's just get right into our episode for today. We wanted to go over something real quick before we start our topic. If you guys have not checked out the box opening video, we have a giveaway going on. Tim, do you want to cover the details for that?
Yeah, so after many days of wondering why YouTube would not let me upload it, re-edited the whole thing, finally got it up. We're going to leave entries up for about a week, and we'll have another, like a gameplay video or something up in like a week and a half or so announcing the winners. But it's real simple. Watch the video, like the video, comment on it. I think what I asked to comment was like favorite card in the set, like whether it's art-wise or gameplay or whatever, and then subscribe to the YouTube channel. And that's it.
Pretty simple. Yep. So we just wanted to also thank Madtown Gaming for sponsoring that video with the box. And if you haven't checked out their website, they're a local shop here in California. So give them a little look-sees on their website at madtowngaming.com, I believe is the URL.
It's either that or Madtown TCG. It's one of the two. It'll be linked in the description. It'll be the correct link.
Anyways, give them a little look, and if they have anything you want, just support them locally. Anyways, after that, we have our TCGPlayer affiliate link. So if you guys are looking for any of your TCG needs, singles, deck boxes, sleeves, if you just bookmark our tab, that's what I did. It made it really easy in your Chrome browser. That way, anytime you go to TCG, it shoots us a little kickback. It just makes things easier for us over here, getting a little bit of that kickback.
Yep, absolutely. And the last thing you guys can do to help support as of right now is pick up some merch. We still have our merch store up. We've got t-shirts, baseball tees, I think women's tees, and then sweatshirts. I know it's starting to get cold, so pick up a sweatshirt. They are very comfortable and warm. I don't know if you got a sweatshirt, but I did. It's very warm.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that the product was high quality for you guys, because it sucks when you order a shirt and they're not very good. So we actually bought the shirts, and they are nice.
Oh yeah, and we're gonna have new like artwork and designs and stuff in the future.
Yep. All right, so let's just dig right into our topic for today, which is going to be what makes a deck good. And it's going to have quite a few subtopics, but thinking of that just as a broad point, Tim, what is your initial thought of what defines a good deck?
So I paid a lot of attention to this when I played Magic, which I know I talk about on most episodes, but Magic taught me a lot of very critical TCG skills. And one of them is deck selection, and kind of hand in hand with that goes deck building. So deck selection, you really want to pay attention to the meta and the meta trend, and with that tournament results. So a couple weeks ago, Green Ghost Hanks absolutely dominated the entire weekend for all three events, right?
Yeah, weekend before this past weekend.
Yeah. And then this last weekend, it was a totally different story. There was little to no Gotenks representation, if I remember right.
There was not a whole lot in the top cut, but there were Like in the I think it's the Carta Magica event, there were like 30 Gotenks decks out of like 65 or something players.
Okay, so a large percentage of the field, but a very small conversion rate, right?
Yeah.
And that has to do with the meta trend. So this happens a lot in Magic, especially with like Modern and Legacy. Um, when new sets come out, something just pushes a deck over the edge, and it has an extremely high representation and conversion rate in week 1, sometimes week 2, and then people start tuning their decks specifically to that matchup because they know to expect the majority of their matchups to be that.
Uh-huh. So a perfect example of that that I can remember is Super Shenron format. It basically was like either you are playing Super Shenron or you are maining 4 BMS because you need those to beat Super Shenron.
Yeah. So that's a good example for our game because it's a little bit different how our card game works from Magic, but the general idea is still the same.
Yeah.
When there's an extremely large percentage of the field being one deck, what people start to do, some sooner than others, and I would recommend start learning the skill and analyzing the format this way, is to start tweaking your deck against the number one deck.
Yeah.
And whether it's oppressive or not, it might just be just a really solid and fair deck. But when it's overrepresented, you have to answer it in your main board so that you have those extra percentage points in game 1.
Right. Right. So that kind of brings us into topic number 1, which is what Tim is covering, which format and like deck choice for an upcoming format. And within that, we have a couple of sub points, which are like, what are your results that you want to get? Because one of the things we talk about is, do you want to have fun? Because that could be basically you play any deck, right? Then do you want to top? That's kind of funneling it down a little bit, where you have maybe 5 or 6 decks you could play. Then if you want to win, you might have 2 choices, right? And the the data on each of those decks that you find out in your own testing and such is going to tell you what decks have the best matchup spread, what decks have the highest chance of winning. And so that's kind of one of the top choices that you have to make when determining what decks are good, is what the field's going to be, what result you want, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of it does come down to, like you said, deciding what you want to accomplish in that tournament, whether it's just to have fun, maybe make top cut, or if you are specifically choosing and building your deck to win the event.
Yeah. An example of that too, because each choice kind of has a risk, right? So if you're funneling your deck choice, it's kind of not totally accurate what I'm about to say, because a lot of the best decks have gotten a lot more consistent in the current sets.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past sets, for example, I played in the Dallas Pro Play Tour, like, I don't know, a year ago or something. And I played Yellow Broly with the GT engine, the red GT engine, Triple Flash.
Yeah, didn't like your whole team take Broly Triple Flash?
We all brought it, but ended up only like 3 of us playing it, because the rest of the people wanted to play Kid Q. He was like the dominant deck at the time.
Yeah.
And and Super Shenron was in there as well. But the reason I took Broly was because if my opponent was not maining Cronoa, I basically auto win game 1.
Yeah, and I know we tested that a lot here too before you left.
Right. And so that gave me really good, like Tim was saying, percentage points against the entire field. Like, it did not matter what deck you were playing. If you did not have Cronoa in your main board or did not see it turn 1, I was probably winning game one.
Yeah, and then I mean you still had pretty good chances of winning even through a Cronoa. It was just harder. You had to go through a little bit more hoops to get there.
Right, right. You introduced like more interaction options, and the deck just became a little bit less consistent because your opponent could like stall you and that sort of thing. But
Yeah, it just added like 1 to 2 turns to the deck. So instead of like winning on turn 2, it was turn 3 or turn 4 typically.
right. So my point here is that I picked a deck that I thought I could win with, but the risk was that I could totally scrub out.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I
if
kind of
if
did the
people
same
are
thing at San Diego also.
right, right with your you're playing the ramp deck, right? Broly or
Yeah, I decided
Shenron ramp.
the morning of to lock in Shenron Ramp instead of, I can't remember if my second choice was Toa or Janemba, but it was one of the two. I basically made a 50-50 choice on what I thought the room would be, which is kind of what you have to do if your intention is to win the event.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes you hit the wrong side of that coin.
yeah. That's kind of the risk you take, but I think it's changed a bit with the newer sets because Bandai's created these staple cards and these hyper consistent decks that they just kind of do their thing and they reward um, the player skill more.
Yeah, that's honestly, it makes gameplay a lot more fun when you're playing against your opponent instead of your opponent's deck.
Right. So moving to our next subject for what makes a deck good, we have probably the biggest thing I want to talk about, which is deck building. Um,
I love
it's
deck
one of
building.
those. Yeah, I know you do. I personally don't really like it that much. I'm decent at it, um, but it's one of those things where the deck builders of the community are going to define the meta.
Yeah, so it's, again, coming from Magic, this is like a really like prominent topic that gets brought up quite a lot on a large scale is your deck builders versus your pilots. Because some people are just like phenomenal deck builders. Like they see things that nobody could see,
Yeah,
but they might not be able to pilot the deck, even though it makes sense in their head. And that's where like someone who's absolutely cracked at deck building builds a deck, gives it to their friend who might be a really good pilot, and let their friend get the results from testing the deck.
yeah. A perfect example of that is one of my teammates, Jamal Moultrie, or we like to call him Mally. Anyways, he like the first thing I remember he said when he joined the team was like, "Hey guys, I'm not the greatest deck builder, but you hand me a deck that's like quote unquote perfected. Tell me how to do it. Give me like 2 games with it. I will have it down and I'll probably top with it." And I can testify that that is 100% true.
Yeah, I
And then,
mean,
some people are just like that.
yeah, it's the same thing as with deck building. Some people just have it, and the same thing goes with like piloting a deck. Give them a deck, give them a brief rundown, put like a game or two under their belt with it so they kind of see the lines of play, and something just clicks. And like
Yeah.
I don't want it to seem like it's not something that can be learned, because it 100% can be learned. Like when I started playing Magic, I was terrible at deck building and probably even worse at playing. But I kept doing it. I kept looking at other people, whether they were just local guys that were, some of the better local players in my area, or even some of the like professional players, which it's kind of a different level in DBS than it is for Magic for professional. But I mean, they're still, I would consider, professional players. Um,
Absolutely.
And it's something that I wish that those players would talk about more often, because it's incredibly important in encouraging people who may not be as well known, but in their local scene, they are definitely known for being an insane deck builder or an insane pilot.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just get into like how to deck build to make a good deck.
All right, so
So go ahead.
number one, I would say choose your archetype
Yep. So
before, well, I
those,
guess you choose your leader at the same time.
yeah,
So we've got, I guess, five kinds of decks we can play. Um, there's aggro, which could be go tall or go wide. There's mid range, control, or combo. And I kind of want to add another one in, which would be tempo.
mm-hmm.
So each one of those has a very distinct game plan that is very different from all the others. And that is going to hone you down onto choosing your leader. And then from there, you start choosing like your engine, or if you're just playing a good stuff deck, what kind of good stuff are you putting in?
Yeah, and so one of the things that DVS has done is that through like draft box 4 and 5, we had these like just generically good cards, Warcry, Obuni, those kinds of things. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that you need to be doing in these current sets is, like Tim was saying, is you need to choose your type of deck, and then you need to look at your engine for said deck. And you kind of want to lean heavily into the engine because it's pretty rewarding with these current archetypes. One of the common deck building traps I've seen people fall into is where they just shove, 4 Obunis, 4 God Sealing Techniques, 4 to like 7 Unisons, your D Magics, and your Trunks Negates all into a blue deck, and you just slap like, oh, the Vegeta ramp leader or something like that, and you don't have anything that utilizes the leader because you didn't push into the engine of the deck.
Yep.
And
So
so,
I think a good example from this set for that is how I built Baby, because I was building it a lot different than a lot of the lists you would see like on Shenron's Lair and stuff like that, where
uh-huh.
I was only playing one Obuni, and it was a tech slot specifically for Sin Shenron to be able to survive their 6 mana turn. That was the only reason it was in my deck. Whereas every other blue deck, 4 in the main board is an auto include.
Yeah, and that's just kind of what the game has groomed people to do with deck building, and I don't think it's completely necessary. Um, and like you said, you play the Obuni, and the some people don't even understand what you meant by play it for their 6 mana turn. But what Tim was doing was cast the Obuni and leave all the tokens and Obuni standing for 25k combo power on defense.
Yeah, so what I would do on turn 5, or if I went first, my turn 6, I guess, if I wasn't planning on winning, is cast the Obuni, get your 3 tokens, use Obuni to untap an energy because most decks it's going to hit, and then just pass. So I would do all my attacks before playing the Obuni. And then I would just pass with the Obuni and all 3 tokens up. So what that did is it untapped an energy. So now I had 2 energy open for like a Trunks negate. And if they attacked through that, which a lot of the times they will, you have 4 things to combo with plus the Gohan. So you have 5 things to combo with defensively. which will make you survive that turn.
Yeah, it's essentially two super combos.
Yeah.
And so, Tim weighed into the baby engine a little bit more than what most people were doing. And I played against that deck, and it's pretty gross. But the point is that don't just jam every good card you can think of into a deck that's based around an archetype, because you're not going to do what the deck's meant to do.
Yeah. If you, so you don't want to go too light on your engine, but you also don't want to just jam every single card printed for the deck into the deck, because a lot of
Right.
it is just kind of like, in Magic we call it like draft chaff, where they're not really constructed playable cards. They're just kind of in there for fun. Like if you're drafting or something, they'll do okay for drafting, but outside of that, don't play it.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of the like commons and uncommons out of our sets are like that. Like there's maybe like one or two for a deck that you'll play, but outside of that, you don't want to. Another good example is with Dark Broly. I know you are not playing the dual attack extra card and the Paragus combination, whereas I am.
Correct.
And I mean, neither one of those is more correct than the other. It's just I leaned heavier into the actual engine with the leader of having more 30Ks and being able to do more with my Brolys, whereas you leaned more into like versatility with the Kidku engine.
Yeah. So, and all of that kind of stems from the first point of this topic, which is what type of deck are you going to play, right? So your version of the deck is a little more aggro. My version's a little more tempo, mid-range kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it can handle fast decks, slow decks a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely.
And so with set 11, I'm not sure about with the draft box 6 or set 12, but generally when you're deck building with set 11, lean up pretty heavy into your engine. I know I have 4 decks that are all engine based, that are all like top contenders, I would say.
Yeah.
And, they kind of build themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice when your leader kind of just builds the deck on its own.
Right.
I think one example that's different, where you don't have to go super heavy into an engine, is Vegex. I know a lot of people are still playing the Vegex line with like the evolve guys and all that. I don't think it's a good call anymore, personally. I know
Mm-hmm.
before you saw my build of the deck was very, very different from anything you had seen, and it hits like a truck.
Yeah.
But I mean that might not be the right choice for right now to play the deck how I have it built, but it also could be. It just kind of depends on how the format is at the time, and deciding if you want your deck to be able to play a little bit of a longer game, or if you want your opponent to have to answer you.
Yeah, and that all comes into, deck type of deck, as well as your expected results and play style. Play style has a really big influence on this, I think, as well, because some players just can't play other colors.
Like I cannot play yellow for the life of me. I've tried. I
Right.
literally
Like if
built like meta yellow go tanks and got absolutely trashed. I just
yeah,
can't play yellow. It doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, and I think one of the formats that just expresses and amplifies a player's identity is team format. Because you
Yeah.
want a wide range of coverage with your types of decks and your order of which you place your players,
Mhm.
and you kind of learn what players are good at what types of decks when you do that.
Yeah, like I'm not good at playing mid range. Uh, I really didn't even play aggro very much before, but now I would consider myself aggro, control, and combo are the three archetypes that I'm very comfortable playing with.
Yeah. So you lie on the spectrums of each side, and then me, for
Don't give me a
example,
mid range deck, and we're good.
right? Me, for example, I'm more in the middle. I'm mid range. I play a lot of red, play a lot of yellow, but my Shenron deck is a little different. I play it slightly differently, and
Yeah,
just so take into account your play style. Maybe ask some of your friends, like, hey, what do you think my play style is? If you were to had if you had to pick a meta deck and say, all right, play this deck for your friend, and you wanted them to win, what deck would you choose for them? You know,
I think that's a funny point because like if we go back to TOP and like the month leading up to it, that's kind of what we did. Like
yeah,
you guys for like a month kept telling me to play Invoker for like a month. I mean, we were testing what like 3 days a week for like the
yeah.
month and a half leading up to it,
It was a lot.
and like every single day, like everyone in our group chat was like, "Bro, you should play Invoker. It's totally your style of deck. I think you do really well with it." I played it for one night and was like, "I can't do this for an entire weekend."
Right. And that's one of the downfalls of playing like a control deck is you are going to go to time probably every game.
Yeah, and I think that was the first big tournament weekend where I took a hyper aggro deck.
Yeah.
But I chose
Because
that deck very, very carefully and specifically with like my card choices in the deck and all of that. Because I know Chris Welch also was playing Black Bibbity that weekend, and we had very different experiences.
yeah, well also he played in the regional and then he ran the TOP event. So he only
Yeah,
got to test it out against, part of the weekend. But yeah, your guys' lists were different and you looked at your expected results, you looked at the field and you said, I think
this is the deck for
Boo,
the field,
Boo can get under every single deck.
and that's what happened. Most of my
Yeah.
matchups were Piccolo Surge or Invoker, and all of those matchups, the games were over very quickly. And another thing about that, I mean, it's kind of like tooting my horn, but I don't want it to come across that way. Is that I saw immediately when Turles was printed that that card was absolutely snapped in half. And I was playing for Turles since the weekend those promos came out because I knew how good it was.
Yeah. There's like this sub format or sub archetype going back to like what type of deck you want to play that exists outside of all the different types we listed, because all the types we listed are like generally fair, but there has also been in this game a archetype that is what I call the degenerate decks, and um, it just so happens that Tim happens to
I have an
lean
eye for
towards those
those, and
types.
I will sniff them out and build them whenever it is possible to,
Right.
which I've
And
learned because almost every deck that I've built has had a major card out of it banned or errated in the last like year and a half.
yes, which is funny. But it's just one of those things where you can build those decks, but it's not going to really teach you like how to build a good deck because you're skewing your deck building towards the degenerate cards.
Yeah, that's I mean, what I do for deck building is not something that you want to do when you're just learning. I would say stick to these main points that we're covering, and then maybe later on we go a little bit more in depth into like more of the advanced deck building stuff because that is a thing. It's a very big mental thing.
Yeah, there's all kinds of um, RNG planning and just even on the math side of it, right? There's tons and tons of statistics on what deck to choose. You know, how much data do we have on the field? What are even one of the things I do is I'll look at the Dragon Ball Super page and see what people are talking about. You know, look
Mm-hmm.
at some Discord chats, look at TCGPlayer, see what's getting bought out, and all that factors in right to what people are going to play.
Yep. Um, it's definitely good to try and pick up on trends, uh, and be kind of discreet about it, especially if you're planning for an event, because that'll help give you some data and some percentage points during your deck selection and deck building process that you wouldn't have had before.
Yep. Okay, so retraining our thoughts here back to deck building. Our third point is tech slots. Um, so, what do you think is the right number of tech slots in a deck? You know, and how do you choose your tech slots? Do you just put sideboard cards in the main board, or do you run cards that are like adjacent to the engine but not part of the engine, but they're like work well with the engine, like saying Kaba, you know?
Yeah. So the number of tech slots you have 100% depends on how many cards you're playing in your main deck. If you are playing 60, which is the maximum amount, you have more room for tech. And tech slots could be anything from just a few extra cards from your engine that maybe you had to cut to, uh, some cards that would be reserved for your sideboard, but now maybe you want to put them in the main deck just to give yourself, a couple more percentage points main deck against some bad matchups. But I like to, for my tech slots, just have kind of generically good cards. So right now, for me, that is like Protector of the People. It's a very, very good card that's normally reserved for sideboards, but it's a great tech option for non-blue decks because it gives you that compounding bean effect, and it staves off aggression for a turn. That's kind of a
Yeah.
tech thing. Another thing could be, like the Keflas I have in my baby deck. That's a tech slot. I noticed that the deck up until like turn 4 or 5 doesn't have a large hand most of the time. If you can slam a Kefla on, I would say turn 3, maybe not 3, turn 4. That way you have an energy up. What you get from that is absolutely insane. Because now every turn after that, you're drawing 2 extra cards and untapping 2 energy. So it lets you be a little more offensive without having to worry about not having energy up for defense. So the tech slots normally, they're just to kind of cover the bases that your main engine doesn't hit, and just cover them a little bit because remember you have your entire sideboard.
Right. So, a good example of that is, let's say your engine requires you to play some kind of card on turn 3 and tap out for it.
Mm-hmm.
You probably want to awaken on turn 3, so that means you'll probably want to make sure you're taking at least 1 extra life or 2 extra life aside from your opponent attacking you, so that way you can be at 4 life when you go to play your engine, so you can awaken and untap, have energy open.
Yeah, I think that's really important right now is, on your awakening turn, being able to play defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I heard it in a podcast recently, but essentially the format has morphed into this, um, like this tempo where everyone is playing 1 or 2 mana below curve
Yeah,
because you're also playing things on your opponent's turn.
yeah, and I mean, I said it in our group chat earlier. I feel like we're getting to a point in this game where you have to learn how to play chess with your opponent.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the text slots, there's not really a whole lot to go into. Like I said, generic good stuff in your color, or stuff that just kind of covers whatever base the rest of your main deck doesn't hit. It's kind of like your uh-oh button.
Yeah. So just some percentages of like guidance. These aren't exact here, but just some guidance percentages here for your deck building. I would say like 60 to 70% should be an engine. So in a 50 card deck, that's going to be about 30, 35 cards. And then for your tech, I like to hover around 15%, 10 to 15%. So that's going to be what, like 7, 8 cards in a 50 card deck.
If
And then
that, and then the
right.
rest should just be like generic support.
Yeah, good stuff. Going to be your unisons, your free counterplays, your negates, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so just kind of use those a little bit while deck building. It'll probably change in the future if Bandai goes away from the archetype based decks,
Mm-hmm.
but for right now, I think that's a pretty good like guesstimate.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty good. Like 60-70% for your engine. Um like maybe like 20% good stuff, and then 10-ish% of tech slots.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think that makes 100.
Yeah, it does.
So next is your sideboard, which is extremely important. Is honestly, I would say probably just as important, maybe sometimes more important than your main deck.
Yeah, and before we get too far into it, I do want to touch on one little counterpoint rebuttal type thing. Is a lot of people are gonna think that like, oh, all the events are best of one right now, so my sideboard doesn't matter. That's actually not correct because your sideboard matters quite a lot. Because of those tech slots, you can side in cards to game one, meaning that you have a higher percentage against that certain deck that your bad matchup is, or even whatever your tech slots are aiming you towards. You have a better chance to beat them in game one, or in this case, best of one. So sideboard does matter even in best of one.
yeah, so what I would encourage you all to do is when you're building decks online, build a sideboard with it before you even test the deck, and then make your adjustments after that. Um, if you know you're going into a best of one event, you're gonna need some of your slots that would normally be in your sideboard in your main deck. So maybe that means you cut a little bit in one of the other categories that would normally be in your main deck, or you just tweak your tech slots in the deck. It kind of is up to the deck and up to you, but I would recommend practicing building a sideboard. Uh, this was something I was very good at when I played Magic. I studied a lot. Probably one of the best like modern day deck builders and sideboard builders in the game. I know he was doing like a academy or course like specifically on sideboarding, which I didn't take, but I watched him a lot. His name is Seth Manfield, and I owe a lot of my deck building ability to watching how he built decks and sideboards. So I'm gonna go into it a little bit, and then you can interject, Caleb.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what I do when I build sideboards personally is I start with like your rule of threes. Sometimes it's two, but I generally will start with three. Um, so if you're playing a deck with like a general 50% match spread across the table, you're going to fall into this rule of threes category where a third of your sideboard is for the mirror match, a third of it is for your worst one or two matchups, and the other third is just for the general field. So that would be things like Protector of the People, BMS, stuff like that. Just your generic sideboard cards.
Mm-hmm.
When you're playing a very polarizing deck, like I guess right now it would be Baby, even though it's kind of under the radar. You have a very good general field percentage. So you don't have to worry about that, which means half of your sideboard is now catered to the mirror, and the other half is for your bad matchup. Um, so with Baby, I noticed that those are kind of one and the same. So mirror for Baby would be the actual Baby mirror, or like long game blue decks. I would consider those like the same thing. And that also happens to be like the worst matchup for the deck. So it was really easy to build a sideboard for that. Um, but there are other decks like I don't it's been a while since I've had like a general matchup spread deck that I've played.
A good example is red decks.
Yeah. Oh man, I haven't played a red deck in a long time.
Yeah.
What's even good for red right now, like sideboard wise?
Um, honestly, it just comes down to so that most red decks are going to have a couple of tech slots, like 7 cards or so, is where your negates go in, because for some reason red has a huge suite of like good negates. And
That is
so
true. They've been getting a lot of really good negates.
you have to pick and choose which ones you want and which ones are good against certain things. Like, Topo's good against most every deck. Um, but sometimes you need some removal, so you might play like After Image or like Is That All You Got? Um,
It's stuff that
anyways,
you're not really main decking anymore, but you still want to have access to.
yeah, and then also a lot of black cards. So like BMS, I would say Koitsukai.
Yeah, Koitsukai would kind of fit into the like general field section of your sideboard, where it's really good against some decks, and then other decks it's just good for card selection.
Yeah, and also another card for the Gogeta deck specifically is Strategies of Universe 7. I actually main 2 copies,
I think
but
that's a great card to mainboard.
it's a card that a lot of people overlook, and it is a huge weakness of the deck if someone has like a maximum power Kamehameha and they're
Yeah,
just,
or
you summon your Gogeta and they just warp it.
yeah, or like when we were testing, and I was playing Dark Broly, you kept strategizing on your 6 drop, and I was
Yeah.
like, wow, okay, so one of my 3 boss monsters just doesn't do anything now because I can't touch it.
Yeah, like what if I had a card in my deck that just said that you can't interact with my card, you know?
Yeah,
And so
it's
that's a really
pretty.
good card for filling the slot of bad matchups.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I would strongly consider mainboarding if you're playing uh, a red Saiyan based deck.
Yeah, 100%.
Sometimes it helps to kind of look at the older card pool. You'll find some gems in there.
Yeah, actually, a really good example of that that I had been on for a while, but hadn't played in a tournament was Zarbon for Sen Shenron,
Yeah.
because it's a combo untap a yellow battle card on your opponent's turn,
Mm-hmm.
and so with your 9-drop, you just negate like 3 or 4 times because
Yeah,
you're comboing
definitely.
and restanding it. And that's a set 1 card.
Yeah, so I have my sideboard for my baby list pulled up right now, so I can kind of go over like the slots and selections for that. So
Yeah,
uh, I have 2 Koitsukais, which are for the mirror. I have uh, a I have 2 copies of the Jiren from Draftbox 5, also for the blue matches, because it counters Turning the Tide.
yeah, that
I
would.
have a 3rd copy of Turning the Tide in my sideboard for those matchups.
Yep.
And then an extra Obuni in the sideboard, which can be good in those matchups. It's generally not for the blue mirrors, but it can be good in them.
Uh huh.
So that's 2, 4, 5, 6. So just over a third of my sideboard is for the mirror. I do have one of my sideboard slots is 100% a tech slot for green matches, and that's an extra copy of my field card. Because I knew that eventually people were going to realize that Tactical Vegeta hits Planet Tuffle.
Yeah. What's the cost of Planet Tuffle?
3.
3.
So the only thing that's going to hit it is Tactical Vegeta.
Yeah, Urbana Wrecker can't hit it.
Nope. And I realized that people were going to catch on to that. So I put an extra copy in my sideboard, and it comes in specifically against green. Then the rest of it, we've got 3 Heavenly Wizard Demigra, which is specifically for Dark Broly and Sin Shenron, which is also very good in those matchups. We've got a few Unexpected Turns, which is basically just for AOD. I have played against like Pilaf, and the main board negates seem to get the job done plenty fine. 1 extra Mafuba. That one was kind of geared towards Red Broly, but it is just kind of insane for 1 energy in general. And then I've had 1 floating slot, which right now it's a second copy of the Sun Goten counterplay, but it could literally be anything.
Yeah.
So it kind of falls into that rule of thirds where a third of my sideboard is for blue mirrors. Like a third of it is for like general field, and a third of it is for the worst matchups.
Yeah. And that's also one of the things you need to realize. I was thinking for the bad matchup slot, tying into the bad matchup slot could be just cards that utterly shut you down when they're sided in against you, such as the new Dropbox 6 My Cycle against like a baby deck, for example. And so you might have to side against side cards because there will be people maining that card.
Yeah, well, especially since it's in every color.
Right, if they feel like they don't like playing against baby.
I think it'll be heavily played at the beginning of Draft Box 6, but I think it'll die down.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of got the Cronoa effect where, you know, people will be like, oh, this card makes you auto win against such and such deck, and then the deck that it hits will adapt and or shift in a different place in the meta, and then people will, play around it, stop playing it, etc. But anyways, my point was that your bad matchup slots in your sideboard could be to counter sideboarded cards.
Yep. So another example is my kind of updated Vegex list. My sideboard there, I have 2 Burning Slashes, which are kind of like for, I guess, like go tall decks or decks with like counters.
Mm-hmm.
Or
so like
they're good against baby, Cooler, because they can't counter this.
Yeah.
Petrification. I've been a huge fan of this card since it came out with set 9. It is very good. I recommend playing it at least in the sideboard of all of your black decks. A couple copies of Super Kamehameha, because it's just good with all the topo like negates that are in the game now. A few Unexpected Turns, because Vegex is very subject to RNG, and sometimes that is not in your favor. So against like go wide decks, you might need this in game 2.
Yeah. And one thing I want to touch up, go ahead.
There's only a couple more slots. 1 Instant Transmission 10 times Kamehameha, which is just a negate you can recur. Because you're going to have like your entire deck in your drop, so warping 2 cards is not a big deal. 2 Jirans, which again are for turning the tide, because that card will absolutely destroy Vegex if it hits. And then 2 of the counterplayed Deborahs. So for Vegex, it's really a lot of tech slots that you just can't fit in the main board. But that's also because Vegex is a very unique deck where like the deck just kind of builds itself. You're naturally shifted into this aggro deck that has insane inevitability because it gets to reshuffle. You're going to see every card in your deck. So you can just play like the best black cards and you're going to see them all.
Yeah.
But what was it that you had to say?
One of the things I wanted to touch on was that for decks that are like that, where they have just a generically good field spread, you will see a lot more tech sideboard slots, so like 1 and 2 ofs, especially if your deck can like recur cards from the drop somehow. And also the other thing that I was going to say was that certain cards you're going to see in every sideboard, like max power Kamehameha.
Yeah.
It's just that these cards hit such a wide spread of things that, you're going to basically always side this card.
Yeah, people are even starting to main board it.
Yeah, the insane people, crazy people. Very crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note. Like, if you're playing a deck that is so incredibly consistent that you don't need any tech slots main board, that's literally what your sideboard is going to be. And they're going to be all like 1 copy, 2 copy. You might have 1, maybe 2 cards that you go up to 3 copies of, but the majority of it, like with my Vegex sideboard, they're almost all 2 copies. The instant transmission Kamehameha is a 1 of, because it's not like super necessary, but it's nice to have. But in decks that are less consistent, you might have more cards that are 3 copies or even sometimes 4.
Yeah. And one of the things you need to do when you've built your sideboard and you think it's good to go is you need to figure out what cards you're going to take out for those cards, right? So sometimes it just kind of comes as you play the matchup and you'll be like, well, I didn't need this 4th Warcry, or, this certain negate wasn't as good against this deck, so I'll take it out and just kind of skim some of the fat for these tech cards. But sometimes also you're going to take out full parts of an engine for like a playset of cards.
Yep.
And so just kind of, plan that out when you're building your deck. What am I going to take out? Maybe running 3 of in the main makes it easier to side it out because I'm not running a 4th copy.
Yeah.
And that gives me an extra slot.
That comes with playing the deck. Once you've built it, you'll start to notice that.
Right. And it comes with also play style as well. Some people don't like running 2 ofs and 3 ofs in a deck because they want hyper consistency or their natural luck. I like to claim that natural luck is like a factor in deck building because sometimes it seems like I'm just naturally lucky in certain instances.
Yeah.
And
like
that
when I
plays
was
a factor.
playing Baby with only 1 ape and saw it every game.
Right. And stuff like that, And so just the way you play and those sorts of things should probably determine the way you build a deck. And so, yeah. Do you have any more thoughts about building a sideboard, building a deck? Like what makes those decks good?
I think the last part of the deck building section, because I think we're gonna have to make this a 2-part series because we went a little long on deck building. But it's kind of what we were wrapping up with anyways, which is test a variety of matchups and get some data collected. Once you get a good amount of game ones down, just start testing game twos.
Yeah,
So say you put
absolutely.
in like 100 game one matches tested. When you, whenever you start testing that matchup again, just start immediately sideboarded both players. And then you can switch back and forth on like who would go first and whatnot. Because
Hmm.
obviously that's another part of sideboarding is you have to know what to sideboard based on if you're going first or second, because that plays a big factor.
Oh yeah, totally. I've had a couple of games that were simply just decided by who went first. The whole match decided by who goes first because I win game one, they win game two, I go first game three, and I win. You know.
Yeah, so typically if you win game one, uh, you want to sideboard into being more low to the ground game two, since you're going to be behind a turn, kind of.
Yeah, on your
Whereas,
curve.
yeah, or maybe your opponent really likes to go second with their deck, and before you start sideboarding, they say, "I'm going to go second." So now you don't have to change as much because you're going to be going first again.
Yeah.
So that's just another thing to take into consideration. But testing and getting a variety of data is one of the most important things you can do, and it will help you to deck build tremendously.
Yeah, one of the things that I recommend people do when they're like really stuck on a matchup is to switch decks with their opponent. You know,
And
have your
learn the
opponent
other
play
deck.
your. Yeah, exactly. Um, Sometimes when I have been like smashing a deck completely with my deck, like when I was playing Jaren, for example, against like Invoker, I felt like I couldn't lose. Right? It was kind
Yeah.
of hard, but like I knew the matchup pretty well. But then when the tables were turned, it was like I know exactly what that Jaren deck's gonna do. Even if I don't know all the plays in this Invoker deck, I know exactly what they're doing, and I can play around that.
Yeah. That's a
And
good
so,
point also. So once you're confident with your deck, start switching decks with one of your buddies in your play group. Learn the play patterns of the other decks, and that comes with playing those decks.
yeah.
But I
So
think that go ahead.
I was just gonna say, wrapping up here, are there any, like, if you just had to name off top 5 decks in the format right now and why, what would they be? Just as a final point.
5 decks. I do still think Gotenks is up there, just
Yeah.
because it's just very good around the board. Um, I think Vegex is still just the best black leader in the game. I feel like Baby is still very underrepresented, and if Green slash Gotenks gets pushed out a little bit more, you might see a surgence of Baby take over an event. I do think Red Broly is amazing. Um, it's less consistent without the TPs, but still very good. Um, that's what, 4. I think Sin Shenron is still very good, and so is Invoker. So I think I would leave those 6 decks as like my top picks. You could probably substitute Baby out with like Soul Striker or SS3, because those are also very good blue leaders and blue decks. So you could just put the blue slot as any one of those 3. But I think that's a good like top 6.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a solid 4 or 5 even more decks that are all on the same playing field. Um,
They're just not there's just a little bit missing that doesn't put them on the exact same level.
That, or even just people aren't playing them because
Yeah.
some people like to play certain types of decks, you know.
Yep.
And so at the end of the day, I think what really matters is, and I've preached this, to the sun and back with our group, is that play the deck that you have the most practice with, play the deck that you are comfortable with, play the deck that you like playing. Because at the end of the day, when you're 9 rounds in and you're deadbeat tired and you're starving, the deck you're going to not misplay with is the one you know inside and out and have played a billion games with.
Yep, definitely.
And to me, that's what makes a good deck.
Absolutely.
Is the one that's got a solid spread and you know the best.
Yeah, pilot has a lot to do with what makes a deck good. Because I mean, a deck can just be good on paper, but if you give it to a bad pilot, they might do well with it because it's just a good deck, or they might do terrible with it because it's not their play style or it's not built correctly, or any number of things like that. So I think a lot of it comes down to the pilot.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, so I think that wraps up part 1 of our What Makes a Deck Good podcast. Do you have any closing points?
Just once again, thanks for our sponsor, Madtown Gaming. Any sealed product you're looking for, check them out. They have also got some cool other stuff like terrariums and things like that for the upcoming holiday season. Check out our TCG affiliate link for any singles or TCG accessories. And then go get yourself a sweatshirt with our logo plastered across the chest.
Yep, and that's everything.
Yep, we'll be back next week. Maybe we do the other half before the normal episode for next week. Who knows? Maybe before next week, maybe just for next week's episode, we will have part 2 of this little mini series of what makes a deck good.
Anyways, we'll see it at some point. This is the Sideboard podcast. Checking out. Have a good one, guys.
See ya.